Thank you. Well, thanks everyone for having me. I think I know most of you, but my name is Crystal Wong. I'm a family doctor. I practice out of UWPC Ravenna, and I've been with UW Medicine for almost 16 years now. And I am also the Associate Medical Director for Digital Health, including leading the remote patient monitoring program for UW Medicine. We are here today to do a provider-centric training on continuous glucose monitoring. We're going to go through some programmatic use cases, some information about the tech, some information about data interpretation, and just kind of facilitating the program. And again, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. We also have Mika Mäkinen, who is our internal consultant for telehealth services, who has been helping me coordinate this program. He will be your first point of contact if you have any issues kind of technically with the program, with the Epic tools, any IT integration, needing job aids or that sort of support materials. And then I'm here to help you guys if you have any clinical questions, et cetera. We also have Tammy Wilson and Allison Everett, who represent our care management nursing and nutritionists. I think you guys will see as I go through the program that this is very team-centric, very team-based partnership with your clinic staff, and your nurse and RD really play a very important role in this program, and kind of good communication between all the different team players is very important for this to be successful. Okay, why is that not going? There we go. Okay, so just to start with the basics, what is remote patient monitoring? Remote patient monitoring is use of a device to remotely collect and send data for interpretation. So in this case, it's going to be interstitial blood sugar. Other times, it might be hypertension or weights or O2 sats, et cetera. So there are a lot of use cases for this, but this program is in particular for our patients with diabetes. The power of remote patient monitoring is really bringing care into the patient's natural state, into their home. Here in our visits, we only see, a small sliver of what goes on in this patient's life. This way, you're really watching chronic disease metrics in their home environment. This is also a way to provide team-based care as opposed to provider-centric care, moving away from some of our legacy models of, everything happens in an in-person visit, everything's kind of shouldered by the PCP. Some added benefits, we're hoping that this does decrease the number of in-person visits, potentially saving our, hard to come by resources like your in-person time for those use cases, those reasons for visit that really do need an in-person visit. So this is kind of a high-level overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to spend some time talking about the workflow, identifying patients. We're going to talk about a little bit of compliance required steps like consent and referring patients to the program. We'll talk a bit about how your patient's going to get the data into the chart and how your support team's going to help facilitate that. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about interpretation of reports that come from the CGM. And then we'll spend some time talking about coordination of care, communicating amongst the care team, and then lastly, just a little bit of coding and billing, and then some time for Q&A. And then please do, if you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat. Mika will be watching it, or if you want to just, let me know, feel free to unmute and just, ask your questions, and, really want to make sure that you feel kind of comfortable with the overview of this program after today's talk. Okay, so this is a Visio. Some people are kind of visual learners and kind of can help you walk through the process. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but this is available if you just kind of want to see all the little steps. I think what I really want to highlight in this slide is how everyone has a part, whether it's clinic staff, whether it's the patient, whether it's the provider, whether it's using your panel navigation team. And it all kind of intersects to help provide high quality care for your patient. One area that we put a little bit of work on, or a lot of work on, after we ran this as a pilot, I think you guys probably heard that we did run 2 remote patient monitoring pilots over kind of the end of 2020 into all the way through 2021, and one of them was CGM. But one area that staff and providers felt like they needed a little bit more redundancy, a little bit more support, was in insurance coverage for CGM equipment. So this area that I'm kind of circling with my cursor right here, this is all new, and we'll spend some time in the slide deck reviewing this in detail from a provider's perspective. But we did put some work into this to kind of help fill those gaps, because sometimes insurance coverage can be a little bit tricky. Okay, so why don't we break this down into some specific steps? So, one of the first things you'll need to do as a PCP is identify who would be a really good fit for this program. And this is about medical eligibility. This is not about insurance coverage. So I just want to make sure that there's a clear delineation, because I think that can be confusing as a provider, like, oh, shoot, Medicaid is only going to cover it for this, so I can't enroll people. That's not true. Just because their insurance isn't going to cover it doesn't mean that this program is not going to be beneficial for the program. It does make it a little bit more tricky to finagle, but it doesn't mean that it's not a good clinical fit. So in my PCP mindset, where I kind of house this so I don't get confused, with new things, is it's just like, okay, let's say you have a patient who's got migraines and you want to order Nurtec. Nurtec would be an awesome medicine for this patient, but you're just not sure if their insurance is going to cover it. So it doesn't change that clinically it's a good fit, but you do have some complexity in coverage, okay? And let me just make it clear that this CGM program is not just who gets a device, it's also who's going to get the clinical staff support. And this is where the medical eligibility criteria, I think, are quite important, because, we are asking the nurses and the dietitians to work within a standard protocol, with standard billing codes and expectations around what happens at visits. And I think it can be kind of tempting sometimes to try to bend the rules and, well, this one person doesn't meet the criteria, but, it really seems like it'd be a good fit. But, when we're learning something new, when we're trying to roll out standards, that can be pretty difficult, for your staff who are already trying something new and maybe feeling a little bit, uncomfortable at first. So we ask that you kind of stick within the medical criteria for this program, which I'll review now. Rebecca, do you have a question, or you can go ahead and just mute?
Hi. No. Sorry.
Okay.
I just joined you. I spelled my name wrong.
Oh, no problem. So who is a good fit from a medical perspective? So our focus is on type 2 diabetes. I know that all of us have patients with type 1 diabetes. All of us probably have patients with type 1 diabetes who, for whatever reason, do not want to see endocrinologist. But this is not the right patient to enroll in this standardized program. CGM is absolutely standard of care for type 1 diabetes, but they really should be doing that in conjunction with their endocrinologist. It's just a bit more complicated and a little bit, I think, out of the scope of primary care in some ways. The second thing is, and I think traditionally you may feel like, oh, okay, this is a good fit for patients with diabetes who are on insulin. And that's true, but it's not just limited to insulin. So anyone who wants to be very engaged with their diabetes care, whether that is, they want to embark in some sort of lifestyle change, whether that's dietary or exercise, and they want to see in almost real time what happens to their glucose when they cut their carbs or when they start exercising every day. This is a really good choice. Also, patients who are on oral medications and maybe they have some compliance issues with medications, or maybe they're still having hyperglycemia with it. You know, the nice thing is you can take your medicine and see what happens. You know, there's like really live feedback for you. So basically, anyone who really wants to be very engaged in their diabetes care is a good fit for this program. So exclusion criteria. So obviously, we already talked about type 1 diabetes. We're also going to exclude patients who get care from endocrinology. I know a lot of us probably have people with type 2 diabetes, but they also see endocrinology for their diabetes. And that's just because the billing codes, you can't double dip. So we didn't want to, you know, confuse or make billing more confusing than it needed to be. So if you have a patient who has type 2 diabetes, is seen by an endocrinologist and is interested in this, I would just direct them to have a conversation with their endocrinologist. We are also excluding pediatrics at the moment and gestational diabetes. I do know that there are some family docs who are providing obstetric care, and CGM is actually not FDA approved for gestational diabetes, although, you know, it's swiftly becoming a well-used tool for that, but, you know, leave that for OBGYN to do. Some other places that you might find patients who are good fits. So as you have your panel management meetings with your panel navigator, you know, one of the core things that we review in these meetings is your diabetes panel. You know, how many patients with diabetes you have in your panel, who's not meeting their A1C goal. This might be a really good choice, especially maybe if you have someone who, for whatever reason, has barriers to care. So definitely want to integrate this into our greater population health work. Okay, so let me pause there at medical criteria for this program before we jump into the confusing world of insurance coverage. Any questions? All right, if things come up, please interrupt me or put it in the chat. All right, insurance coverage. So let me first say that this changes. You know, it's just like every year there's a different formulary. Every year my kid's inhaler seems to cost a different amount of money. Who knows why? So fingers crossed, you know, as CGM becomes much more present, you know, in the vernacular. I mean, I didn't go through this on the last slide, but there are a lot of pictures of celebrities that wear, you know, these devices. This is a huge marketing campaign. I mean, it seems like you can't watch network television without seeing a commercial about these. Also, there was a picture of a cat at that last one. Vets are even prescribing that. That's actually Erin Beckstrom, who's the manager at SLU. Her cat was prescribed one of these to see if it had diabetes, and it did have diabetes. So anyways, there are a lot of use cases out in the market. So, you know, as this becomes more mainstream, I would hope that it becomes a little bit less problematic to get coverage by insurance. But for right now, this is what we got. So for the most part, commercial insurance will cover the CGM equipment, meaning the sensor and or reader if they need it, for any diagnosis of diabetes, type 1, type 2, meds, no meds, insulin, no insulin, etc. I have heard anecdotally from some patients who are in like high deductible plans that when they go get it from the pharmacy, even though it's quote unquote covered, the cost from insurance is like astronomical, and they can actually get a better deal if they just ask the pharmacist to run it through GoodRx, or they, you know, go to a pharmacy where it's cheaper for cash. So that is just one thing. I mean, it's very similar to, you know, the conversation we have to have with patients on meds, like, you know, I'm going to prescribe this for you. It should not be that expensive. If it is shockingly expensive when you go to the pharmacy, maybe ask your pharmacist if it can tell you what the cash price is, the non-insurance price. But in general, commercial insurance covers CGM equipment well. Medicare, you get this another layer of really requiring insulin, and not just basal insulin, but needing at least TID insulin, and this, you know, subjective, you know, determination that this patient needs frequent insulin adjustments. One part of this program is having some Epic-based tools to help you guys with documentation, and we do have some standard dot phrases that do have this language impregnated in the dot phrase, just so, you know, if the prior auth team needs to help you get coverage, you know, your chart notes represent the information they need to get covered for patients. If you have someone who has got commercial insurance and you don't need this language, just please delete it out of the smart text if you're using it. But it is in there to kind of make that process a little easier. The other thing that Medicare needs, and I'm going to go into detail about this more on the next slide, is they need a DME form because the coverage from Medicare for CGM comes from a DME benefit. And then there's Medicaid. Medicaid adds on one more thing that Medicare did not require, and that is needing to self-monitor blood sugar, at least QID. Doesn't mean the patient needs to be doing it because, you know, if you remember the slide about who's a good fit, CGM is actually a great fit for someone who really doesn't want to poke their finger, you know, maybe has had barriers to doing that, you know, maybe they're not bringing in their numbers because of those barriers. So this is a great choice, but for Medicaid, you just at least have to have recommended or instructed the patient to be doing ChemSticks QID or more. But again, they don't necessarily have to be compliant with that plan. And then just FYI, after that ball of wax, some patients may actually just be motivated to, you know, pay cash for this because it is a lot of hoops to jump through, or maybe they don't actually meet criteria. Maybe they are Medicaid and are not on insulin. I actually have a patient like this. I wrote her prescription about 4 weeks ago, and she was able to go to the LibreView website and get some coupons, and she got 2 for free. So, you know, if you have some savvy patients, you know, or patients who are willing to just self-pay, you know, for a couple sensors, you know, that actually might be less of a headache than trying to jump through the hoops, or, you know, be a mechanism for those patients who wouldn't qualify based on the severity of their diabetes for this program. So there's some tips and tricks about how to, you know, get this covered or get it for a lesser cost. I know that Allison and Tammy really emphasized that in the RN/RD training. So your staff will be, you know, getting a little bit of information about that, but you know, you can get these outside of insurance coverage. And then one thing, so obviously there's the equipment, there's also the cost for the time that we spend taking care of the patient, whether that's staff time for inputting data or your time interpreting the AGP reports, et cetera. So all of that actually has been well covered by payers. I think sometimes it's hard not to get stuck on equipment coverage, but the actual RPM codes that you bill out for administering this program actually have been really well covered by all payers, commercial, Medicare, and Medicaid. Allison or Tammy, do you have anything else to add on this? I know this is an area we've been really trying to educate people on.
I'll just chime in that, especially when this is Allison, the program rolls out, we have providers that are so excited. They share the you know, idea with the patient, and sometimes they don't qualify. So that's where, if you're unsure, you can grab Christy as your person there at that clinic just to ask them or send them a staff message, or if you're bringing up the idea with the patient, just to say that, especially if they're Medicare or Medicaid, that that, you know, coverage is kind of dependent, and you might have to, you know, there might be some it's not a slam dunk is what I guess I'm trying to say with your Medicaid and Medicare populations. Sorry, I'm rambling.
Yeah, it's new for all of us, but hopefully it becomes easier as time goes on.
Yeah, but reach out to your staff because they're like there to help you. So
yeah, very good. Okay, so what do you do? Okay, so you've identified a patient who's a good medical fit. you have this determination, okay, we need to get them equipment somehow. What are the next steps? So one is you do have to consent them for the program. This is very similar to how we consent for our BHIP program, or, e-consults, because we are going to be providing a medical service and we're going to be billing insurance. So there's a very simple RPM consent dot phrase. I do have a screen that's got all the Epic dot phrases aggregated together, so you don't have to worry about this slide in particular. There's a one-stop shop. But we've got a consent statement there, and you can just blow that into your SOAP note from the visit. I think by far the majority of these conversations happened in a visit, whether that's face-to-face or whether that's on telemedicine. You can consent via phone to, maybe you're talking to the patient about labs, you just did their physical, you got their labs back and they have a new diagnosis, diabetes. I mean, I probably recommend that you guys do that in a visit anyways, because, get paid for your work. But if you happen to be on the phone with the patient, you could consent them over the phone. You can consent back and forth in MyChart. It's just a little bit more complicated. You just have to make sure that you have explained the consent and then you've received a message from the patient saying, yes, I consent to this. I would like to be part of the program. And then you can put the consent language in there, but it has to be kind of a real back and forth where the patient understands, and understands the program and wants to participate. And then we also have a referral to RPM, and this is something that is good for bookkeeping. It's also good for alerting, your staff that you want this patient to participate in the program. And so you just put in a referral to RPM, very similar to, again, going back to the BHIP workflow. When I have a patient, I want to take part in BHIP, and not only do I consent them, but I have to put in the referral to BHIP. And then if you want some handy dandy patient FAQs, description of the program, we have this dot phrase, which is the CGM RPM enroll ABS. And that basically has some language, for the patient of what to expect, the nurse will call you to get your intake. This is what the program comprises. It's medically necessary, et cetera. So just kind of a helpful dot phrase to use to make sure the patient just kind of has something to reference after you've referred them to this program. And then please do CC that chart, that encounter chart, to your RN. I would say RN and RD probably, if you have both supporting your clinic, because this is kind of like a dual program. And that would just kind of alert them oh, okay, this patient is coming in, for an intake. I need to, make sure I have them on my list. I need to do kind of, my steps in the process. And specifically, everyone's going to have their own kind of personalized diabetes plan that you set up for them, right? So you'll be conveying that to your support staff so they know, okay, if this doesn't look good, or, Crystal just started metformin on this patient, or, et cetera, whatever is going on in the patient's actual diabetes plan, your staff is aware of that. Typically, this will also happen in that visit where you have decided with the patient that this is going to be a good fit and they want to enroll, and you're going to get them their equipment. There's actually a slide that we're going to talk about, what happens behind the scene for your RN and RD, but you will make their life a lot easier if you can remember to order their equipment. So ordering the sensors and reader, if they need it, is actually pretty easy. For commercial insurance and Medicaid, it's just like a medication. It's basically, we're all used to kind of ordering chem strips and, glucometer, that type of stuff. You order it just like that. You type in the order into Epic. There's a prescription order. You sign it. It ERXs to the pharmacy. Medicare is different. As I mentioned, this is DME. This is not a medication. And you have to do a couple things. One, there needs to be a DME prescription, and you can do the DME order in Epic, that's fine. Personally, what I do is actually use the medication order. This just helps me not scramble my brain, you know, so I'm writing the same order every time, but instead of ERXing it to a pharmacy, I change it to print. So it prints on my printer, and then I just sign it and I give it to the patient. And I say, this needs to go to a medical supply company. And then, you know, the patient would just turn that in instead of the DME form. In addition, they need a Medicare DME form. And if you use the standard dot phrases we have for the program, there's actually a hyperlink in the dot phrase to this form. It lives on the UWPC SharePoint site. So you could also just like print a few and have them on your desk if that's easier. But the hyperlink is in the dot phrase for you. And then you have to print it and fill it out for the patient. That needs to also go to insurance in order to get coverage. So again, you know, as I mentioned, there is a bit of red tape to get covered for Medicare and Medicaid. But, you know, so for some patients, you know, it might be a big headache and they may just want to pay for 2 sensors for $70 and do this for a month, because not all patients will need this, you know, forever. In fact, most patients won't. Most patients will just need this short term. One thing in bold on the bottom, if your patient does not have a smartphone, they will need a reader. The way that this works is you wear a sensor on your arm, and then you take your smartphone and you sync the equipment at least every 8 hours. Otherwise, your data is lost. So if they don't have a smartphone, you'll need to write them a prescription for a reader, and they'll pick that up as well. One other thing that we've learned in trying this for real is if your patient has a really old smartphone, sometimes it's not compatible with the app. So, you know, I think that's a little bit of a rarity, but our nurses who have seen so many things have definitely seen a patient show up with like an iPhone 2, and lo and behold, there's no Libre app for that device. So there's just some little weird things here and there. This is what the actual order looks like in Epic. So if you just type in Libre or Freestyle Libre, you'll get these orders. So the one in the upper left is for a reader. So if you have a patient who doesn't have a smartphone, and everyone will use the lower right, which is the Libre 2 sensor, and they come in packs of 2, and it's 2 sensors for a 1 month supply. I typically am only prescribing 1 month at a time because I haven't had a patient yet who's going to need this long term. If you do have someone who you think will need it long term, you could give them a 90-day supply, but I personally haven't run into that in my own practice. But maybe if you had someone with type 2 diabetes who was on insulin and this is going to supplant their finger sticks, then you know you might want to write them, you know, a year's worth. All right, so what happens behind the scenes? You've seen the patient, you consented them, you place the referral, you order them their stuff. Well, the referral that you put in goes into your care management work queue. There have been a little bit of some technical things with the Northwest clinics. I think you guys just kind of had a little bit of a different infrastructure around care management and et cetera. I'm not going to get into that historically, but if you have problems with this, please let Nika know, because we've been able to fix this just through IT tickets, et cetera, for clinics that had that issue. But so the referral goes to the care management work queue. That's for your staff to work. Your RN or RD, whoever's going to take charge of this for you, is going to, you know, review the whole package. You know, did you put in the equipment order? Oh, shoot, Crystal must have been busy. She forgot it. Let me ping her and see if she can order that. Is the consent in, et cetera. And then if everything's a go, then they will reach out to the patient to, you know, confirm that they're enrolled, make sure that they picked up the equipment that you wrote for them. And then if all those are good, schedule the intake appointment. One thing I'll highlight, and I'll probably highlight again in this presentation, is that the intake appointment has to be in person. That is how the compliance rules are written around how to administer these codes via CMS. So that's not flexible right now. And I know sometimes it's like, oh, why does that make sense? You know, this is a program at home. Why would you have to come in? And I think the way CMS is seeing it is this intake is supposed to be for your clinic to help you set up your device. And how could you do that virtually? So anyways, so for right now, you know, if you're going to expectation set with the patient, just remind them that this intake has to be in person. It can't be on telemedicine. This is a little bit about the behind the scenes of what's going to happen if your patient does need authorization for equipment through Medicare or Medicaid. So obviously for Medicare, we talked about the DME form, so that will be in there. And then that needs to go to the DME provider. And then if everything, you know, all the boxes are checked, then the DME company will just ship the equipment to the patient. Now, there may need prior authorization, in which case, you know, some chart notes, et cetera, need to be sent. And we do have participation of the prior authorization team, which is the same team that helps us with meds to help collect some of the information. And they'll help kind of fill in the gaps for that. Is there a question in the chat?
There is, and it was answered. Basically, the question was for Mountlake Terrance, is Christy going to be managing the referrals since we don't have an RN? And Christy answered, yes.
Thanks, Christy. So, but anyways, again, if you guys have issues like technically with that, please reach out. We want to make sure that, you know, the workflow is going well. All right, and then, you know, once you'll always be kept abreast of the prior auth process, and hopefully your patient gets their equipment and then they'll be able to do your intake. But, you know, if there's some issues, then, you know, probably in your case, Christy will come let you know, like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know, we are not able to get this covered. What should we do? And then you can troubleshoot that with her. Okay, so everything's green, your patient got their equipment, et cetera. They're gonna come and schedule an in-person meeting with Christy, and she's gonna do a couple things. The emphasis of the first visit is on teaching the patient how to use their equipment. And as you can imagine, there's a little bit of diversity in ability, right? We all have patients that, you know, all they want to do is digital. All they want to do is send you my chart messages and see you virtually. And then you have patients that maybe need a little bit more hand-holding or personalized instruction. So depending on the patient's kind of set point, Christy may or may not get through the education, agenda setting, goal setting part of the visit as well, in which case there might need to be a second appointment set up to do that. But if you have a pretty digitally savvy patient, they, you know, understand how to put the sensor on, how to sync their device, how to, you know, get into Libre View, et cetera, without too much difficulty, she may be able to do the second half of the visit, which is like medical history review of current lifestyle habits, goal setting, et cetera, and also just reviewing their personalized diabetes plan that you set for them. Let me just highlight this again, that's in yellow. Please make sure your plan is relayed to your RD. You know, she's going to be doing a lot of work on your behalf, and just want to make sure that she understands exactly, you know, what the plan is for the patient, especially if it's around medications or you know, when you want the patient to follow up with you, et cetera. Okay, and then if for some reason you're going to be kind of talking to the patient in prep for this visit, just make sure that they bring their device, so their sensors and their reader, or their sensors and their phone, to this appointment, because again, the billing code is contingent on device training. So if they don't have the device, we can't do the visit. After the patient has been trained and knows what to do, they're going to wear this monitor continuously. You know, you could do shorter intervals, but as we're going to talk about in a few slides, when in terms of validity of data and having enough to make a good clinical decision, you'll need at least 14 days. So I've been trying to coach providers to say, okay, first check-in is going to be like 14 days from now, with you know, Christy going in and getting the report and sending it to me as your provider. So what will happen is your designated staff will log into the LibreView account, will pull the AGP report and scan that into Epic. There will also be an encounter created that has a very standard dot phrase that has some of the key metrics that we're tracking on these AGP reports in the body of the text, so that when you get in your in basket, you can kind of eyeball it and be like, oh, look, GMI is 6.9. That's pretty good. Time in range is 87%. There are no hypos. Cool. I can kind of hold on to this and review it with the patient in our next visit. Or maybe you eyeball it and it's like, oh my gosh, the GMI is 12. That seems, not expected. And then the link to the actual AGP reports in the encounter. So you could just go and click it there, like, oh, I just want to eyeball this and see if there's something more emergent in this report. And then, there will be some back and forth between PCP, RN, RD, patient, just the typical kind of coordination of care, et cetera. So, here, this is the other thing that we got added on based on the pilot. So there is a diabetes flow sheet that clinic staff has been trained to use. And this is a way for you to actually trend the GMI, which is the calculated A1C based on the AGP report. And that way you can go to one place, and let's say you have a patient who's been wearing their CGM for a couple months, and you would see, if you're asking for data to be uploaded every 14 days, you would have 4 of those in there and you can watch it. It's just a way for us to have this electronically trendable, as opposed to having to like open up that PDF and then look at the other PDF and write them down on a napkin and see what happens. So this is one area. Is there another question, Mika?
Yes, there is. There's a request if you can explain GMI.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I'm going to get into that in the next couple slides. So I'll table that one for a second. All right. Any questions about just kind of the staff work, what Christy's going to be doing for you, what you're going to see in Epic from a provider perspective before we jump into interpreting AGP reports? All right. So this is an AGP report, or ambulatory glucose profile, and this is what is kind of synthesized from the data that your patient is uploading to the cloud. And we're going to go through all these quadrants and kind of chat through it, including that question, what is a GMI? Now, I only have a few minutes to do this. I'm going to do it pretty high level, but if you are interested in a more detailed training, Dr. Savitha Subramanian, our diabetes primary care guru, recorded a 1 hour long, very detailed, tons of information webinar about this, and we actually have the link to that presentation at the end of our deck here. There's also a link to a video from Abbott, who is the manufacturer of Freestyle Libre. It's actually really good. It's like 13-14 minutes long, and it also walks you through how to interpret these. I think for most of us, this will feel a little intuitive. In fact, it probably just feels like better information than what you get from your patients bringing in chem sticks right now. But for additional information, there are resources available. Okay, so this is the actual sample PDF of what is going to be scanned into Epic in the media tab. So like I mentioned, you'll get a message from your RD and it'll have like a little snapshot of some key metrics, but it'll also have a link, one of those blue hyperlinks, and you can click it and bring up the AGP. So first we're going to start in this upper right hand. You see this little bar with the colors. So we're going to talk about time in ranges. So time in range is very self-explanatory. It's basically the amount of time that data was collected where your patient was in range for blood sugar, meaning not too high or not too low. And in general, your time in range goal is going to be greater than 70%. And in kind of the validation studies, looking at this technology, a time in range of 70% corresponds to an A1C of 7%. So greater than 70, awesome. You're probably hitting your glycemic goals. There's also some information about time below range here, probably more important for patients who are on either insulin or other oral medications that could potentially cause hypoglycemia. And then there's the counterpart, the time above range right here. The next quadrant, let me show you back here, is the upper left. And this is going to have kind of your key metrics in it. So number one, it's going to show you the time frame in which this report covers. And you're going to want at least 14 days of data to make a good educated decision about whether or not your patient needs to have anything changed. So this report right here, this example is 28 days. It also is going to have the percent time CGM is active, and you want at least 70% of the time, because if you have less than 70%, you have a lot of gaps and you're not exactly sure what is going on with the patient during that time. So this report, this patient has been really great about wearing their sensor or syncing their data 98% of the time. So this patient was super compliant in keeping their device on and syncing it. As I mentioned, the minimum sync with device is every 8 hours. If you go beyond that, there's just not enough storage and you lose the data. So this is definitely a point that your RD is going to emphasize with the patient when she teaches them how to use them. It also has an average glucose right there, which, you know, that's what it is, an average glucose. And it's got this GMI right here. And the GMI, you can think about that as a calculated A1C based on their time and ranges based on in this report. So as we know, A1C is a 90-day metric, right? Even if you started someone on insulin today, you're not going to see that A1C move very fast. And, you know, sometimes it can be a little bit disheartening, I think, for patients. You know, it seems to be kind of a sluggish metric. And so this basically gives you a kind of calculated A1C rate, you know, based on, you know, today's readings, based on the last 14 days readings. So you can kind of use that as a proxy, although it's not a real lab value. You know, emphasis that you still do need to check A1Cs. This is not, you know, supersede that or take the place of that. But it just kind of helps the patient get an idea of how well they're doing without having to wait 90 days, you know, to really see it reflected in the A1C. The last thing I'll show you is glucose variability. This is just a marker of how much fluctuation there is. And if you can keep it under 33%, you'll just lessen patients' risk of hypoglycemia. So again, a metric that's a little bit more important in patients who are on insulin. Mika, is there another question?
No, there was not. Allison, I just wanted to let everybody know that the good news is that Christy has done a couple of these patients at the OPMC, so she has experience.
Oh, awesome. Good job, Christy. I'm glad OPMC is sending you people. All right. And then here's just a real simple rubric. Like, oh, this is new. I don't know. Where am I going to be? Am I going to get lost? And so here's some simple steps. And then let me draw you, actually, before I jump into this, let me draw you back to this screen. So this is basically in the bottom, you see this kind of curve that has like this average like glucose per time, and it actually has the individual days of the patient was wearing it. And, you know, this is just a better visualization of good old fashioned like chem sticks written in a book, right? So this should feel kind of familiar to us. You know, who are kind of trained in using, you know, finger pokes. So similar paradigm, and this is really, you know, what you're going to talk through with some of these points here. So step one, is there enough data to review? Meaning, was this at least 14 days and did the patient wear it at least 70% of the time? You know, if it's only 6 days and the patient wore it 50% of the time, probably shouldn't use this report to, you know, titrate their medications. Number two is, you know, really the power of continuous glucose monitoring is patient engagement. And I think one of the things that really inspires patients for behavior change or just fighting the good fight or, you know, maintaining, you know, effort and controlling their diabetes is engagement and partnership in their care plan. So best practice is to sit down with the patient and review the report together. This can be in a face-to-face visit. This can be in a telemedicine appointment. You know, the lovely thing about telemedicine is you can share your screen. So you can look at it, you know, live together. You can bill out the code for interpreting this outside of a visit. But I do think best practice is to bill it out in a visit where you did review it with the patient. Number 3, so you're going to look at those curves and you're going to identify like, okay, when did you eat? When do you exercise? What time do you go to sleep? When do you take your metformin, or when do you take your Lantus, etc.? And then look for the patterns, okay, let's look at meals. Whoa, do you see how high you're spiking at dinner? Is that the largest meal of the day? Is it carb heavy? Are your meds wearing out? Like what's going on there? Where do we need to adjust things? Are there times where you're having hypoglycemia? What triggered that? Etc. And then based on, your interpretation of these curves, you can make an action plan. I think I mentioned that a patient who has Medicaid who got 2 free sensors, I actually sat down and interpreted this with her, and she was incredibly tightly controlled. I mean, her GMI on it was like, I don't know, 6.4, 6.5, something like that. Very good. She did not like the fact that her evening blood sugar was a little bit high, even though, on average, her GMI was fine. And so she's going to implement a little bit different meal planning, just based on that. So, I mean, even patients who I would say, hey, you're doing great, they may have some personal goals that they'll identify based on information from the reports. And then we have this handy dandy dot phrase right here, CGM RPM interpretation note. It just rolls off the tongue. And that has all of the key things to put in so that you can bill out the code, which I'll show you the billing grid in a little bit, and bill out your time for interpreting this. And that can be billed on a monthly basis. So every 30 days, you can bill that out. It's worth 0.7 RVUs. So, similar to like a level 3 appointment or something. And can be billed on top of your typical LOS. So you sit down with the patient for diabetes follow-up, you're going to bill a 99214, plus you're going to bill, your CGM interpretation on top of that, and you'll get a few more RVUs. And then please, 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 when you do spend time to interpret this and, personalize the diabetes plan for your patient, please send that to Christy so she knows, okay, so-and-so met with Dr. Wong and this is what they changed. Okay, I will, have that in my mind as I help support this program for the patient. So this is another just list of some of the dot phrases. Again, I think we have a grid, we have it aggregated in a grid, so it's easy for you to find, but there's some standard notes that you'll get used to. So, there's a note from the RN or RD surrounding, putting the report into the chart, any sort of unexpected things that maybe happened, like, oh, the patient was on vacation, that's why this data looks a little weird, etc. There's the interpretation note for the providers to use. There's a treatment AVS to summarize for the patient and just some patient-friendly language. And then, there'll be some back and forth through the chart, and the RN/RD will use, e-care messages or phone call documentations to send things back and forth. Your RNs and RDs are also going to be tracking their own time because they do have codes they can bill for that time, which is awesome. So, they do need to use these encounters to kind of document their time spent for the patient. This is a handy dandy billing and coding grid. Really what you guys are going to use is this 95251, and that's the interpretation of reports that can happen every 30 days. These other codes are really going to be used by your RD. So the 95249, that's the setup visit for device. And these 99457s and 58s, that's for their time. You can actually bill this. It just gets a little messy if you're going to do it and Christy's going to do it because, only one person can bill them out per, the calendar month. So anyways, in general, this is really going to be staff billing for their time there. I want to highlight that we have a job aid that has everything in it. It's got information about identification and enrollment. It has insurance information. It has information on how to order a sensor. It has that billing grid. It has a aggregated dot phrases all listed in there. So we will send out the link to this. You can bookmark it on your computer, or you can just print one and have it on your workstation. It's only 8 pages long. If you don't want to have the whole thing, I think for providers, probably the biggest things would be section 9, so billing and coding summary table, and section 10, smart text summary, just so you know how to use the tools in Epic. And then here's some additional resources. So as promised, there's the link to Dr. Subramanian's talk about CGM interpretation. There's also, that's the link right there to all the job aids, including all these PowerPoint decks, et cetera, although Mika will send that out in a separate email to your clinic. And the link to that job aid that I just showed you is in on this webpage as well. And then the bottom one is the training video from Abbott, specifically for providers. This one's a little bit shorter. It's about 13-14 minutes if you're interested in a little bit more support or education around interpretation of AGP reports. This is a list of all the dot phrases there. Again, that's also in the job aid. So the consent dot phrase, the ABS language, the RN visit, follow-up visits for the RN, the interpretation for the provider to use, and then you know, some treatment instructions for patients there. So that was a lot. I've got 4 minutes left. What questions do you guys have?
Thinking about that we have an RD but not an RN, is there like a number of patients, you know, that Christy feels like she might be able to handle at once in terms of, I don't want to overwhelm her if we suddenly have a bunch of referrals?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me first just say, we are not requiring this or have quotas, or you're going to get in trouble if you don't use it. You know, we're not saying like, oh, this is the new way to do diabetes. It's truly just a tool that if you feel like is a good fit, you can use. So you don't have to worry about us like counting it. I mean, we are paying attention to volumes, but there's no like quota. But maybe I'll let Allison, Tammy, Christy, you know, weigh in on like how much is too much.
At the other clinics, there haven't been busloads of people. There's, you know, often there's 4 to 6 to 8 that are initially referred in the first few weeks. And then some of them may not meet, you know, criteria or be, you know, the billing. But the first appointment needs to be face-to-face. So, you know, it might be because Christy's there 2 days a week. It might be for a patient that's identified. And Christy, you can jump in here. You know, it might be a week or 2 to get the equipment. Just make sure, sometimes it takes longer to get it ordered than the appointment's already here. But then the rest of it's remote, right, Christy? So you can follow up with the patient. So in between, or if she has a cancellation, I mean, she can be looking at things. So Christy?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, go ahead and refer. Like if they fit and you know it's a good match and whatnot, we want to pursue it. Just go for it. And if I'm running into issues of not being able to get people in, I'll just circle back and we can have a conversation about that.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the flexibility. You know, I said this earlier in the presentation too, but you know, most patients will just kind of be on and off of this. You know, they might only need a month of monitoring. You know, I have one patient who this was really powerful for her to impact her lifestyle, but then the holidays hit and she kind of fell off the bus and she wanted to do another round. So I think she's done actually like on and off 3 rounds over the past year since I started doing this at Ravenna. So, you know, you may have patients that are only there for a little bit and then, you know, maybe their second time around, if they need it for X, Y, or Z reasons, you know, they don't have to do the whole program. It's more just kind of picking up where you left off. Oh, let me answer one more FAQ because I think I've gotten this question from every single clinic I've trained, what to do with IGT patients or patients who are pre-diabetic. So number one, you know, they wouldn't be included in this program. But, you know, use your own professional judgment if you want to prescribe for the patient. Just know that, you know, it's going to have to be cash pay. Insurance, it's not FDA approved for IGT. But, you know, you may have some patients that this is really powerful for them as they're trying to, you know, not end up like their parents with diabetes, et cetera. So you'll have to kind of take that on your own shoulders. But you know, it can be a useful tool for those patients, just not in this specific program.
Can I chime in real quick with our last? Yeah. I will say just from our experience at OPMC, that if you do a Medicare patient and go through the DME route, it is nice to hold that form or have staff scan it in, or you can give it to me and I can scan it in. But I might have to do some kind of follow-up on that and calling DME or calling the patient, see if they got it. And if there's anything in between, I'd rather just have the information there than have to bug you guys for that. So that would be helpful.
Yeah, good plug, Christy. All right, everyone. Well, we're at time. This recording will get sent out to you. So if you need to share it with any other providers, it's there. Mika will also follow up with materials like slide deck, et cetera. And you guys are really good to go. You know, Christy's up and running already. So if you identify patients, feel free. All the tools are in there. And, you know, do contact us if you have any weird IT stuff. You know, we had some providers say, I don't know why the dot phrases aren't showing up for me, or, you know, whatnot. We want to troubleshoot that for you. All right, everyone, have a good rest of your Monday. We'll see you later.
Thank you, Crystal.
You're welcome.